Find the derivative of g of t equals 3t minus 4 times the square root of 8 minus t squared. Then evaluate g prime of negative 2. G of t here is the product of two different functions. We have a 3t minus 4, and we have the square root of 8 minus t squared. The first thing I'm going to do is rewrite the square root as first power, second root, 1/2 power fractional exponent, so that we can use the power rule for the derivative of that term. Overall, we have a product of two different expressions, so overall we're going to make use of the product rule for the derivative. G prime of t will be the derivative of the first, 3t minus 4, the derivative of that will be a 3, times the second left alone, so 8 minus t squared to the 1/2 power, plus the first left alone, 3t minus 4, times the derivative of the second, which is a power rule overall because of the quantity to the 1/2. So 1/2, bring down the power, 8 minus t squared, subtract a 1 from the power, I will call it 2/2, and then multiply by the derivative of the inside. 8 will be a 0, negative t squared will be a negative 2t, to complete our chain rule. Now everything is multiplied here, and so I'm going to move this and this 1/2 together to the front. So what we have is 3 times 8 minus t squared to the 1/2 for our first term. In our second term, we're going to have a negative 2t, and times the 1/2 will be negative 2t over 2. And then a 3t minus 4, and then 8 minus t squared to the 1 minus 2, negative 1/2 power. The 2's can cancel at the front of it. We'll cancel those out. The next step, I'm going to rewrite that negative exponent in the denominator of that term. So g prime of t will equal, we have 3 times 8 minus t squared to the 1/2, and we will have minus a 3t minus 4 stays in the numerator, but then 8 minus t squared will move to the denominator to become a positive 1/2 power. Our next step is to get a common denominator between these terms so we can combine them together into a single fraction. The common denominator will be the 8 minus t squared to the 1/2, so I need to multiply this first expression by 8 minus t squared to the 1/2 over itself, a form of 1, so as to produce the common denominator. Now, this first result, we have a 3, and we have these multiplying, and you add their exponents since they're matching base, and 1/2 plus 1/2 is 1. So what we have there is 3 times 8 minus t squared to the first power. And then for the second fraction, we have a numerator of 3t minus 4, but notice it's subtracting the second fraction, and that means it subtracts all of its terms in the numerator. So keep parentheses around there. And then this entire thing is over the common denominator that we found, which is 8 minus t squared to the 1/2 power. The next thing to do is distribute the 3 into here and the negative into here. And then we will combine like terms if there are any like terms. So that will give us a 24 minus 3t squared minus a 3t and then plus a 4. And all of this is over 8 minus t squared to the 1/2 power. Now 1/2 power means square root first power, so it'll be the square root of 8 minus t squared. We can combine some like terms together. A 24 and a 4 can combine. So we'll have 28. I'm going to write this in increasing order of t, so minus 3t and then minus 3t squared. And then all over the square root of 8 minus t squared. So there's our derivative g prime of t, simplified. The next step is to evaluate g prime of negative 2, which means to plug in negative 2 in for each of the t's. So we'll have 28 minus 3 times a negative 2, and then minus 3 times a negative 2 squared, all over the square root of 8 minus a negative 2 squared. In the numerator, we have 28. A negative 3 times a negative 2 is a positive 6. And then we have a minus 3 times a negative 2 squared, which is a 4. All of this over the square root of 8 minus negative 2 squared is a 4, so a minus 4. Back in the numerator, 28 plus 6, we can work that out to be a 34. And then a negative 3 times a 4 is a negative 12. And all of this is over the square root of 4. 34 minus 12 is a 22. And the square root of 4 is a 2. 22 divided by 2 comes out to 11.